and then Emily Miller, and then a combined presentation, and you guys can go whatever order you want. A combined presentation by Gil Harrington and Robin Lawrence.
Once again, my name is Chelsea Morrison, and my topic is the interrogative techniques. I'm comparing the United Kingdom and the United States. So my research question was, what are the techniques and the processes interrogators use in the United States comparing with the United Kingdom in order to get a victim to falsely confess? So the problem is that there's just too many miscarriages of justice. There are too many people forced into falsely confessing to crimes that they did not commit. Interrogators or police officers are most responsible for coerced confessions. And we see that there are more coerced false confessions in America, particularly Chicago, rather as the United Kingdom. So I compared the two. In Chicago, interrogators use the Reed technique. The Reed technique was created by John Reed. This technique, it uses force and brutality to kind of get the person to confess. They use the maximization and the minimization technique. The United Kingdom, they use the peaceful method: preparation, engage, account, closure, and exposure. So this is more of a soft method. It just produces better outcome, and confessions are less likely to be overturned in the long run. The interrogators are more, like I said, they're more peaceful, but it's not like they're overly nice. They're just not forcing. They're not forcing the citizen, the person, to say anything wrong or say anything that against actually what they did. And also there's the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. The CPS, they're in charge of all prosecutions in the United Kingdom. So in my opinion, the United Kingdom's technique is overall better. The techniques are more likely to be overturned because they make sure that they're not forcing the person to say something that they once again did not do. And brutality is not a popular technique in the United Kingdom like it is in Chicago. But Chicago has a long way to go. Chicago is trying to establish an accountability system for police officers. There's the IPRA, and their job is to make sure the police are working in a professional manner and keeping people safe from harm. And even though there is the IPRA established,
Independent Police Review Authority.
yeah, the Independent Police Review Authority. Even though they're not able to catch all of the bad cops, they're still trying. And that's it.
All right, so it's okay, we'll just move together these next weeks.
Okay, so I also looked at false confessions, but I looked at internalized false confessions. I'm Emily Miller, by the way. Internalized false confessions are when a suspect is made to believe that they actually committed the crime through coercive psychological techniques. It's usually supplemented by a lack of memory being supplemented with a false memory. So I looked at what causes an internalized false confession and how they're elicited in the United States and the United Kingdom, and if there was a difference between the two, and then which system was better at preventing false confessions. To elicit a false confession, obviously there's physical force like torture and harsh confrontation, but there's also coercion, which is plea bargains and false promises. And there's also psychological techniques, which is what causes internalized false confessions, which is using a lack of memory against the suspect, but also misleading representation of evidence. In the U.S., They use the Reed interrogation technique, which we just heard about, but it's interrogators breaking down an unwilling, guilty suspect into confessing to a crime, but that doesn't safeguard innocent people against this system at all. Whereas in the UK, they use the peace interrogation technique, which we also just heard about, but it focuses more on listening abilities and asking open-ended questions as opposed to leading questions. So in the US, there was Billy Cope, who he was drunk and fell asleep, and he woke up to his 12-year-old murdered daughter, and he immediately called 911. When he was in police custody, he was held for 24 hours without food or drink. He waived his Miranda rights, and then he also volunteered to a polygraph test 5 times. When he was given a test, he was told he failed, but he actually passed. He then wondered aloud if a person could commit to a crime without them actually knowing it. And this idea was actually suggested to him by his interrogators the night before, at which point an examiner said that he broke down and confessed. He said, "I must have done it." He then spent 2 nights in prison without seeing any family or an attorney, upon which he wrote a confession, and then he was taken back to his home under police supervision and reenacted the crime. He's still in prison today. In the UK, Sean Hodgson Teresa DeSimone was raped and strangled in a park, and Sean Hodgson was arrested the day after for theft. Now, he had been in and out of Borstals, which are like juvie, since the age of 11. He had been convicted of crimes, but never of anything violent. He was also found to be a pathological liar under psychological examination. He confessed to numerous crimes that he actually could not have committed. He was told that the blood evidence found on Teresa's body was either A or AB, and he had type A blood. He then confessed to a priest that he kept having a nightmare of a murdered woman and he kept seeing her face. And then he said to a police officer, "I did the murder, but I don't know why." He spent 27 years in prison and then was eventually released on DNA evidence that proved he could not have done it. So in the US, there's about 25% rate of falsely confessing of prisoners who have been exonerated because of DNA evidence falsely confessing. Whereas in the UK, there's about a 10 to 20% rate. In the UK, they have the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which allows for judicial review to a higher court to look at their case. Whereas in the US, we have the appellant system, we can work through the different courts. Also in the US, there's the Commonwealth v. Chadwick, which says that confessions given after a promise of favor are inadmissible in trial, whereas in the UK, they have the King v. Warwickshire, which bars involuntary confessions. In the UK, they do have universal recording of interrogations, whereas in the US, it's not mandatory nationwide. It's only in 12 states and Washington, D.C., where it's recorded. So I think that to prevent false confessions, we need to have a reformed interrogation techniques in the US. We need to get off of the Reed interrogation method and start using the peace method, because it is less harsh and there's a less likely rate of people falsely confessing. In the US and in the UK, there are innocence projects which help people who have been victims of miscarriages of justice seek to right their wrongs. But a major aspect would be mandatory reporting of police interrogations. Not only would that safeguard police officers from being accused of something wrong, but it also helps the suspect. It's an objective and accurate account of the confession's circumstances and the environment in which it was elicited. So that's it.
Feel free to close out your presentation when you're done, so that way there's not like 10 minutes there. Yes.
Good afternoon. I am Robin, and this is Gilda. Today we're going to talk about false confessions, why they occur, what a false confession can do to one's life, and what is being done about it. First, and some of this you've already heard from our previous presenters, but there are a couple different types of false confessions. The first one can be a voluntary false confession, which is made without any pressure by any outside source. A coerced confession, which is made to avoid a hostile interrogation or in exchange for a promise made by a police officer. Coerced internalized, which Emily just spoke about, when an individual makes a confession because they actually believe they have committed this crime. And in the United States and the UK, there are a couple of different techniques used by officers. In both places, officers or detectives will take advantage of a person's vulnerabilities. And as mentioned before, in the United States, the Reed technique is common. And this is a very confrontational, hostile technique, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable, whereas the United Kingdom approach is very much more peaceful and non-accusatory. In the United States, of 205 men that were exonerated by DNA, 25% of them had falsely confessed, and of the current prison population in the UK, 20% of them have said or have admitted that they have falsely confessed to a crime. As in the United States, most of the false confessions are police-induced, whereas the United Kingdom, most of the confessions